Welcome back to ACIM Book Club. We're on part 2 of our discussion on the notes on sex in the CE. I'm Alison Anton with the ForgiveNest Podcast for A Course in Miracles. We're reviewing the notes from Principles 18 and 46 today. So we'll review Principle 18 first. The topics relate a lot with the ones in Principle 46, so I thought I could just look at both of these today back to back. It's easy to read this discourse at face value and think the course is down on homosexuality and up on heterosexuality. That's why I want you to watch the video assignment on homosexuality that addresses this. Because really, Jesus is challenging both. He's challenging how the vast majority of us use sex. Jesus sees sex as driven by the need for personal gratification, which he says amounts to using sex selfishly, as frankly, we tend to do with every single pursuit we chase here. He says in paragraph 4, you have misunderstood sex because you regard it as a way of establishing human contact for yourself. Then he goes on in paragraph 5, nothing physical, mental, or spiritual should be used selfishly. The pleasure from using anything should come from utilizing it for God's will. This is a big topic throughout the entire Course in Miracles. As students, he's training us to use all aspects of our relationships for the purpose of God's will. Some of you know there's a great deal of discourse later in the text on special relationships and holy relationships, with emphasis on how allowing our relationships to be guided and arranged even by the Holy Spirit is key in this path. So it's not actually surprising he'd address our selfish uses of sex, because as we know, sex is a big part of most human relationships. He's saying the highest form of sex, which for most of us is a very distant ideal, is egolessly to allow God to use it to bring children into the world so that he can arrange, quote unquote, temporary human constellations or families as he sees fit. But he also makes it clear that being spiritual parents is an equal use of that same ability. So he's not saying we all should have kids. Neither Helen or Bill actually had kids, by the way. Bill was gay, and Helen was outside of her childbearing years by the time she was scribing the course. In this sense, human constellations might not only refer to families, but also to the many people God arranges to come into our lives. What I'd personally like to draw out from this discourse, the thing that calls out to me the most, is the last paragraph. Human birth, maturation, and development is a microcosmic representation of a much larger process of creation and development of abilities. The real function of parents is to be wiser than their children in this respect and to teach them accordingly. So time and bodies are an illusion, but remember from Principle 15, it's important to use the time and our circumstances in the most constructive ways possible because they're a reflection of true creation. In the context of this section on sex and parenting, he's asking us to use sex in the highest way possible with the highest goal possible in mind. Parents are in a miracle-giving position in that they're the teachers and leaders of this soul coming into the dream. That's a positional strength that can be used to heal the child. Okay, let's move on to the sex notes in Principle 46. These start in paragraph 3 and go to paragraph 9. The very first thing he says is, I want to finish the instructions about sex because this is an area which the miracle worker must understand. Jesus is really emphasizing to pay attention to this material, not just this section, but all the sex notes. And I highlighted this entire paragraph because I can't walk away from it. Every sentence here is really valuable. Sentence 2, he confirms that inappropriate sex drives are misguided miracle impulses. Inappropriate sex drives or misdirected miracle impulses result in guilt if expressed and depression if denied. That second part of the sentence gives us a taste of what results when we either express an inappropriate sex drive or deny it. Neither of those are the answer. Acting on inappropriate drives results in guilt, and denying it results in depression. I think we can maybe all relate to this. It's like we're on a teeter-totter, trying to balance and maintain our sex drives. We have hedonism on one extreme, and we have puritanism on the other extreme. The moment we slip over to either side, we're hit with that emotional ramification that goes with that choice. He ends the paragraph with the solution, that there's actually no real pleasure in sex, and that real pleasure comes from a different mindset entirely. It comes from by doing God's will. Essentially, we could say we need to recognize and act upon the miracle impulses under those sex impulses, because that's God's will. And the result of that is real pleasure. Then he says, whenever God's will is not done, an experience of lack results. This is because not doing the will of God is a lack of self. That's a really big statement right there, that last one. Not doing the will of God is lack of self. In a new way, he's bringing us back to the concept that we're trying to solve a problem within a framework of false identification or an upside-down view. It's like we're on that teeter-totter, upside down, trying to figure out how to balance it, but the problem isn't actually balance. It's that we're upside down and need to first get ourselves situated back on top. We're not being ourselves when we're upside down. Our true self only starts to show up when we work to bring ourselves back to the upright position. And from that right place on top of the teeter-totter, yeah, we're still on top of the teeter-totter, but from that right place on it, we can start to solve the actual problem. And we have the help to do it as we realign with God's will, as we start to see in a bit. There's also an introduction of a theme being stated here in this last sentence. It's an intro to that our will is God's will, and God's will is our will. This becomes a central theme later in the course. Then he continues the conversation from Principle 18 that sex was intended for procreation. It's a learning opportunity for both the parent and the child. The whole process was set up as a learning experience in gaining grace, he says. I read it as a way for us to learn how to be appropriate creators as we progress back to true creation. We'll come back to this in paragraph 8 at the end. And in paragraph 5 and 6, he talks again about how sex isn't actually pleasurable. And most interestingly, he says pleasure is reliable only because it stems from an error which people shared. So it's like we have a collective agreement to hold this idea of bodies and body level pleasure in our subconscious minds. And because we're all agreeing to it, we see it everywhere. And it's just simply burnt into our minds, validated as true over and over and over. Without miracle impulses rising up to show us what's real pleasure and what's real communion, we're stuck in believing body pleasure is where we find it. And the red highlights here are something I want to mention in relationship to another passage below. He is actually introducing us to a practice to learn to solve the real problem. Awareness of the error produces guilt. Denial of the error results in projection. Correction of the error brings release. Correction is the solution, but we definitely need to become aware of the problem first before it can be corrected. And in my teeter-totter analogy, we have to first become aware that we're upside down. That first part probably inevitably unchains the subconscious guilt we've been holding due to denying the error and projecting it out for so long. You can see how looking at that for what it is would induce guilt. We don't want to see this strange game that we've been acting out with each other. But of course, we all eventually need to. Correction of the error brings release. Let's scroll to paragraph 7, where he continues the conversation on correcting it. He says in sentence 3, invite me to enter anywhere temptation arises. I will change the situation from one of inappropriate sexual attraction to one of impersonal miracle working. And we'll get more instruction for this in the sex notes under Principle 48 next week. And as a corollary to later discussions about special relationships, we're told in chapters 16 and 17 that whenever your thoughts wander to a special relationship which still attracts you, you should allow Jesus to enter and step between you and your fantasies. And then the Holy Spirit will release you from your attraction. These instructions to me are a continuation of the listen, learn, and do motto. Listen to my voice, learn to undo the error, and do something to correct it. We first have to recognize it, and then we listen for the instruction from him and how to undo it. And then, of course, we need to do that thing that he guides us to do, which we can gather is giving miracles indiscriminately. Okay, we're almost done here, but the very last thing he says about sex per se in this section is the love of God, for a little while, must still be expressed through one body to another. That is because the real vision is still so dim. Everyone can use his body best, though, by enlarging the perception of others so they can see the real vision. The solution right now in the stage we're in as learners is to practice seeing the holiness in everyone instead of just seeing bodies. That is what he means by enlarging the perception of others. This is the action that brings us right side up on that teeter-totter and is our real purpose for these bodies. The world and bodies as we know them aren't true creation. We already know that. But if we're living in alignment with God's will and giving miracles, we're learning how to act here in grace. We're using our bodies for the highest purpose possible. And eventually, we all come upright. He finishes with the ultimate purpose of the body is to render itself unnecessary. Learning to do this is the only reason for its existence. So with this path of practice, we're consciously attempting to switch to miracle-inspired relating. It's our only real reason for being here. All right, and we'll have one more discourse on sex next week under Principle 48. Until then, you've got a lot to ponder. I'm Alison Anton with the ForgiveNest Podcast for A Course in Miracles. It was great talking to you.